Have you ever worried about slipping in the bathroom or helping a loved one get up safely? You need to know about Safety Grip. Unlike outdated smooth metal grab bars, Safety Grip has a unique textured design that gives a better grip and more control, especially for those with weak or tired hands. It looks great, feels secure, and installs just like a regular bar. Visit heartmobility.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Aging Together podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, an occupational therapist with board certification in gerontology and additional specialty certifications in dementia and fall prevention. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields and caregivers who share their lived experiences. Let's meet today's guest. Rick Henkin is a husband, father, grandfather to 6 girls, and a caregiver for his wife. He became a caregiver when his wife, Sonia, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in January 2020 at the age of 65. Based on his experiences, Rick is the creator of the Caregiver Mastery System. Rick, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Pooja. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. You've been a full-time caregiver for your wife who's living with dementia, Alzheimer's specifically. Can you start by sharing a bit of your personal journey into caregiving?
It really started back in 2019. Sonia didn't seem to have any attention span. We'd be sitting there watching TV and she'd get up and go do something. And I'd say, no, wait for the commercial. I wanted to share it with her. So I'd always pause and maybe she'd come back, maybe she wouldn't. And something in me said, I wanted to contact not her primary care physician. I wanted to contact specialists who dealt with brain health. And I did some research online. I'm in Los Angeles, and I found in Santa Monica, California, there's the Pacific Neuroscience Institute, and they have a national reputation. Everything with brain health, cancer, dementia, everything, injury. The doctors are from Harvard, Yale, UCLA, USC. Anyway, I contacted them. And my hope was that they would say, oh, well, let's just adjust her medication. She was taking antidepressants. So on the way there, Sonia's saying, why do we have this appointment? You need this appointment. I don't need this appointment. You're the one that's got something wrong with you, just fighting me. So we got there. Doctor gave her several tests because it was explained to me that different parts of the brain process things differently. And, repeat these words and all that. She did fine with most of them, or with all of them, until she got to the clock test. Now, I don't know if the clock test is familiar with all of your listeners, but just so you know what the clock test is, you're asked to draw a circle like a clock, fill in the numbers, and she did that fine. And then he asked her to draw the hands showing 10 to 11, and she couldn't. She just stared at it. Literally 5 minutes went by. She started to cry. I started to cry. That's when she realized she had a problem. And at that point, it was just mild cognitive impairment. Doctor told me it's like a jigsaw puzzle. It takes a while to figure out what type of dementia it was. So after many, many CAT scans, this was in the fall of 2019, after many, many CAT scans, and then finally an amyloid PET scan, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So that was the beginning of our journey. And our lives change just like everybody's lives change who's listening to this. We have 6 granddaughters, as mentioned, and Sonia went from being their best friend, crawling around on the floor with them, playing dress up and makeup, to becoming the scary grandma and becoming disruptive to the whole family. For a while, she developed what's known as Capgras syndrome, which was named after a French psychologist from the 1920s. It's an irrational belief that the person whose face she recognizes, me, is an imposter. We'd be sitting there and all of a sudden she'd just look at me and say, where do you live? Don't you have any friends? I want you out of here before I call the police. And then she'd run next door to tell the neighbors about the strange man in her house. So I'd leave, I'd take a walk, come back in about a half an hour to find her crying, wondering where I'd been because she had no recollection of what had taken place. And needless to say, it created incredible tension for us. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. None of us are given any sort of instruction in this. We didn't learn anything in high school or learn anything in college. We're figuring it out as we're going along. And I didn't know what to do. It was frustrating. It was stressful. It was angering. At that time, Sonia was going to a specialized adult daycare for people with dementia, but I never knew what I was going to get when she came home. They all loved her. She would help them set up the activities, break down the activities. But when she came home, we live in a duplex. So one of our sons with his family and two of his daughters live upstairs. We live downstairs. She'd run upstairs, bang on the door, 20 times in an evening. They stopped opening it. It was scaring the granddaughters. It's during mealtime, during their homework. And if I may backtrack a little bit, I understood enough about the caregiver burden, about the toll it can take on my own health. It's a significant medical phenomenon, the psychological, emotional, physical, financial stressors associated with caregiving. And it's the reason that family caregivers often end up in the hospital before their loved ones. I had actually read a survey in the Journal of the American Medical Association that said that family caregivers have a 63% higher risk of dying than their peers who aren't caregivers. I mean, that's amazing. And I was determined not to let this be my story. I wasn't bad enough. It's taking my wife away. I wasn't going to let it take me down. But going back, one night, my son calls me. I go upstairs. His family's in Oregon for spring break. And he said he's applying for a job online. I said, cool. And he shows me it's in Oregon, Ashland, whatever city in Oregon. And I just felt like I was being abandoned. And he said it's the most difficult decision he ever had to make, choosing between his mother or his family. And his family came first. And I could understand that. Now, I didn't want to do anything because it was expedient for me. That just didn't seem right. It seemed disrespectful. I mean, after all, this is my wife. So I contacted her neurologist, her nurse practitioner, and her psychologist. And I asked, so why is she so wonderful at daycare and not so much wonderful at home? And they said, because at daycare, she has a structure, and at home, it's like the Wild West. And they all said at that point, it's probably time for her to move into a memory care facility. And I eventually did that. I felt like, okay, if they're saying that, then it's probably time to do something. But before Sonia had moved in, like I said, I was determined not to let this be my story. So I started researching online, figuring, well, there had to be answers. After all, this isn't a new issue. But on website after website, I found the same basic information. Take a break, find 15 minutes, exercise, meditate, etc. And while it's all helpful information, it had nothing to do with the emotions and feelings I had. And I realized that mine was the only brain that's going to change here, and certainly not Sonia's. So after several months of researching, writing, trying different possible solutions, asking for spiritual guidance, I found it's funny how things just come to you, whether it's a hunch or intuition. I finally found the answer while driving down the street. It was painted on a building wall. It was a quote by Maya Angelou, and it said, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. So by incorporating this truth, I arrived at what I call my heaven island. It's a state of peace, acceptance, clarity, where I could care for Sonia without losing myself in the process. And at that point, I thought, okay, I came through this. So, Sonia's back at home. She's been at home for over a year now. I came through this and I thought, well, let's see if there's other caregivers I can help. And I looked on Facebook and I found dozens and dozens of groups for family caregivers with tens of thousands of members in total. And I read their comments. I'm exhausted. I have no more friends. When's this going to be over? One woman was even contemplating suicide because it's easier than take care of her husband. I mean, just reading that made me want to cry. So I took everything I learned, applied it to myself, applied it to others first because I wanted to see if it works for other people. And I created the Caregiver Mastery System, which is a step-by-step roadmap designed to help caregivers eliminate their stress, their guilt, their anger, their resentment. And just so people know, look, I'm a caregiver too. We don't need one more thing to do, even if it's to our benefit. So I created this not to be some giant time-consuming program. I didn't create it to add more to anyone's plate. I created to lift some of the weight off other people's shoulders. The lessons are short and practical, and if you apply what I teach in just minutes a day, I guarantee the caregiver will start to feel a real difference in 2 or 3 weeks. So that was the genesis of Caregiver Mastery System.
You touched on so many different things, and I want to kind of start from the beginning there, where even getting a diagnosis takes forever, right? So from those first early signs and symptoms to the actual diagnosis on paper can easily take 6 to 8 to 12 months, depending on when you can get in for appointments, how long it takes the providers to run their assessment and interpret the results, to how long the waits are for imaging and how fast those images can be read, how fast they can rule out other stuff, right? Because the first thing they start ruling out when you have presenting symptoms are like medication side effects, right? Or infection, things that are easier to delineate and remove, right? But to get to not just even a diagnosis of dementia, but specifically Alzheimer's, it can take a while. So I'm so glad that you immediately went to the specialists and started the process to getting the diagnosis first. And then you touched on the clock test. And this is something that I like to always touch on a little bit because people start doing it at home and they're like, oh, I can't do it. And it's not always the exact act of doing it, but it's the process it takes you to do it or to not be able to do it, right? And so really assessing what is it that is causing them the inability to do it. We joke a lot about this as occupational therapy practitioners now, of a lot of people now, like, they're not used to these clocks anymore, right? We have all digital clocks.
That's true.
It's becoming harder to test people on it because it's not something that is common anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it could also trying to understand that, just because someone doesn't do well on that test doesn't necessarily mean that that is dementia, right? Or mild cognitive impairment, because it could just be that they've never had to use an analog clock.
It's really kind of an age-related test at this point.
It is. And that's unfortunate, right? Because there's no like definitive age of onset for dementia, right? Dementia can occur at pretty much any stage, especially other types of dementia like frontotemporal dementia can be in your 30s or your 40s. And so, some of this testing definitely doesn't keep up with the changing societal standards and norms. So that's something to always think about. You mentioned the groups on Facebook. Yes, so many caregiver groups on Facebook, on Reddit, across platforms where people are just so upset at the journey, right? They've lost themselves, like you mentioned. They're struggling with their day-to-day, and it's not the physical work, right? The physical logistical work is easy to Google and figure out how to get things done or how to do something. It's really the emotional and the mental load that caregiving takes. And it's something that people don't talk about often, right? You mentioned stress and guilt and resentment and all of these things that people just don't talk about until it's too late. And then at that point, they're sort of on that end of the spectrum where it's really hard to reel them back in. That statistic you shared, there's actually a more gruesome statistic that 40% of caregivers actually don't outlive their care recipients. And so
Really?
yes, wow. I think you said 63% is at higher risk of hospitalization. But yeah, 40% don't actually outlive their care recipients. And so, that's a drastic amount of people who are relying on a family caregiver to take care of them. Mm-hmm. And yet they lose that caregiver well before they pass away, right? And so then how does that impact everybody in that way too? So I think overall, your process clearly outlines why a lot of these topics or these conversations are important and how you've turned that into something that's practical, applicable, and easy to absorb in short ways. Now, I want to focus in on sort of what you mentioned about stress, burnout, guilt, resentment, that a lot of caregivers experience, but not a lot of them talk about it openly. When did you first start to realize these emotions, and were they starting to take a toll on you, or were you ahead of it enough where you felt that it wouldn't take a toll?
I was ahead of it. I certainly acted out. I did feel resentful. I did get angry, etc. Intellectually, I had already known that this can take its toll on me. and that I wasn't going to let it. At that point, I didn't know how not to let it. I didn't know what to do. And that's, again, when I saw this Maya Angelou quote, which I kind of knew in the back of my head that, yeah, it's all up to me. Sonia's not going to change. She can't help it. There's no point in getting upset with your loved one because they do something that you don't want them to do. They're not doing it on purpose. They're not pushing your buttons. Sonia used to turn on all the water faucets in the house. Well, I could explain that, gee, that's a terrible waste of a resource and it costs money. Is that going to make a difference? No. I can yell at her. Is that going to make a difference? No. It's just, look, when at the beginning, if I got upset and I yelled at her and I'd see the confusion in her eyes, I just shrunk. That made me feel terrible. And one thing caregivers have to realize, even though this person may not be able to express themselves, they still feel. And they still feed, if you will, if that's the correct word, off of your feelings and your emotions. You're angry at them, they get that. And, my whole thing is about acceptance, really, because it not only helps you and your physical health by not getting upset, you're adding to the quality of the relationship between you and your loved one. So you're getting a second benefit. And one thing I tell caregivers, you have to realize you're doing the best you can, and that's good enough. It's like I said earlier, we were never taught this stuff. When I was in high school, we never even learned how to use a checkbook, okay? We're just not taught this stuff. And like I said, it's important to recognize that how your loved one is progressing has nothing to do with your caregiving because you're not in control of the disease's progress. You can be the most amazing caregiver in the world, and the disease will still continue to move forward. So That's one thing you have to be aware of. And another thing is there's a lot of armchair generals out there, whether it's family or friends, who mean well, but they haven't walked in your shoes, but they certainly want to tell us what we should do. Mm-hmm. So I don't pay attention to those people either. They offer advice with little understanding of dementia, and their comments don't define your success as a caregiver, because a lot of caregivers feel like, my family's upset with me, or I'm not doing enough, I should do more. And I challenge them to ask one of these armchair generals to take over for a weekend and see if they start singing a different tune, because believe me, they will. Everybody knows they will. Another thing, if I may, 2 fundamental principles that I came across and that I live by that apply not just to caregiving, but can apply to any aspect of our life. The first one is your thoughts create your feelings, which create your behavior. It's not your loved one's behavior that's creating your feelings of anger or stress, whatever. It's how you choose to accept those feelings, and you have a choice in your feelings.
Yeah, it's the reacting versus responding, right?
Yeah, you have a choice in your feelings. And an example I always think of is 2 paraplegics, both in wheelchairs, both the same age, both as a result of an auto accident. Why is it the one person is bemoaning their fate? Nobody's ever going to love me. My life is over. And the other person's out playing wheelchair basketball. All the circumstances are the same. It's all up here in your mind. And it may not be an easy thing, but you have the ability to change your thoughts. And remember, they're just thoughts. They're not absolute truth. They're just thoughts. And you can change that.
Part of the concept in there is also known as like radical acceptance and just thriving through whatever you can and moving forward, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, stuff comes up because it's just part of our human nature or psyche. And when something comes up, I think to myself, okay, how does this thought serve me? How does it restrict me? How much unnecessary pressure, stress, and anxiety is it adding to my life? And what would happen if I change this thought? Then you can take it a step further and rewrite that thought by taking some practical steps. If you're thinking, well, I'm not doing enough, remind yourself of all that you do every single day. And again, the disease is going to continue forward. It has nothing to do with our caregiving.
Yeah. You mentioned Sonia did stay in a memory care for a little bit, and now she's back home. How long did she stay there, and then what prompted your decision to bring her back home?
Well, she was there for 22 months.
Okay.
And what prompted the decision, ran out of money, quite honestly. We had long-term care insurance, and it ran out. For people who may not know, or probably everybody does, it's incredibly expensive these days to have someone live in a facility. And at that point, also, because of the progression of the disease, Sonia is not the same person. So she's much easier. I'll tell you one thing that I realized several months ago when I was putting her to sleep, getting her ready for bed. I realized that as caregivers, we have an incredible blessing, opportunity, whatever you want to call it, a role that most people don't have, in that we can make the rest of our loved ones' lives miserable or joyful. And for me, I'm going to do everything I can to make it joyful, because when the time comes and it's just me, I don't want to look back and say, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have said that. And I believe that most people are going to do that because they're going to realize that all the little annoyances, all the things that bother you just aren't that important in the entire scheme of things. And I want to know that now before it's too late.
You mentioned you brought her home and then you went on Facebook and saw all these groups, which sort of led you to starting to develop this Caregiver Mastery System. Was there a specific turning point that led you to beginning it? Or was it a series of just reading all these comments and wanting to do something about it?
Actually, I started it before I brought Sonia home, because while she was still in memory care, that's when I started it. The turning point was, I like to help people if I can. That's just my nature. And I don't know if you can see behind me, I have a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's very long, but the last two sentences I've always carried with me. And it says, to know that even one life has breathed easier because you have lived, this is to have succeeded. I love that. I love that. I try to live by that as best I can.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful quote.
So your approach with the Caregiver Mastery System focuses on creating peace and clarity. I know you said acceptance in just minutes a day. What sort of mindset tools or daily practices have made the biggest difference in your own life that you've then used to inform what you've developed?
Probably mindfulness, because I'm mindful when I start to get angry or upset. I'm aware of it. So before I blurt something out, I think to myself, okay, is this going to raise my blood pressure? Is this going to make me less healthy? And that's what I focus on. Everything I try and do, it's held up to the standard of my own health. Look, Sonia and I have been married at this point for over 34 years. It's a second marriage for both of us. But when I see her being so dependent on me, I can't just take that for granted. I've got to honor that and respect that. And again, I don't want to look back and say, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, or be upset with myself because, I got angry or whatever it may be. I got frustrated. They're going to do things that frustrate us, but they're not doing it on purpose. They can't help it. Another way to look at it is it could just as easily been the reverse. What if it was the reverse? How would you want your loved one to act towards you?
Yeah.
And along those lines, be grateful that it didn't happen 10 years earlier, because now you have 10 more years of memories.
We'll be right back.
Quick pause. Are you caring for a loved one? Recharge inside the Aging Together Caregiver Hub, our free online community packed with expert tips, live Q&As, and peers who truly get it. Join in seconds at aging-together.com, then dive back into the show feeling supported.
Yeah. I've never thought of it that way, of what if it was reverse. I think that's a really important perspective to reflect on, of, if this was in reverse, how would you want to be treated and how would you want your loved one to behave or react or respond to certain situations?
And another thing, because look, caregivers are hard on themselves. I should do this, I should do that. But you have to stop fighting against the way things are. Okay, once you stop doing that, you lift a tremendous burden off your own shoulders. Another thing I suggest to people is, what if a friend came to you that was in the exact same situation and started complaining? How would you treat them? you'd show them compassion, you'd show them care because you care about them. They're your friends. Treat yourself the same way. You deserve that same compassion as well.
Yeah. Something you mentioned earlier is something I also say a lot to caregivers is you're doing the best you can with the information that you have, with the resources that you have access to, right?
That's true.
And it's one of those things where they're like, well, I wish I could do this or I wish I could do that. And it's like, is it an access issue or is it an education issue? Is it an awareness issue, right? We can tackle some of that stuff, but at this moment in time, you're doing the best you can with what you have, right? And usually that's a way to help them resolve some of their guilt, right? Because that's usually what it is. Guilt is the biggest emotion I think that people feel. And a lot of times it's like you said, we did not learn this stuff, right? If I didn't work in the industry, I wouldn't know how to navigate this stuff until I needed to, right? And that's what most people do is they learn everything under the sun after something happens and on the go. And you can't possibly expect somebody to learn or be aware of every in and out of our care system within days or weeks, right? It's a process and it takes a long time. And so I'm glad that there's a lot of mindful practices and reflection and perspective change that can help with managing some of those emotions. Do you have a specific story, whether your own or someone you've worked with, where a small shift created a meaningful emotional relief?
Well, there's a person at the beginning, I started handing out my course to people because I wanted to get feedback. And her husband had Alzheimer's and cancer. And she gave me such a glowing reviews. I hadn't even expected it, but she said, people are saying to me, you're smiling again. And she said, I just felt like this whole weight was off my shoulders. And just so people understand that it doesn't mean you don't care anymore. That's why nothing bothers you. You still care, but you're approaching it differently. You're approaching it from the standpoint of acceptance. Look, this is the way it is. Nothing I can do about it. Basically, let me make the best of it. Because another thing, this is only one chapter in our lives. It's not the entire story. And that's something to think about. We all have the power to change how we respond.
I think in some cultures or society in general, sometimes there's a lot of stigma associated with caring for a parent with Alzheimer's, there's stigma associated with Alzheimer's and dementia in general, but I feel that sometimes caregivers feel that they can't be happy-go-lucky or they can't go do things that make them happy or fill their cup because in doing so, other people will view them as neglecting or disrespecting their care recipient. And it's the, what will people say? Like that mindset of caring too much about what other people think and how you're approaching a situation that was handed to you, right? I think there's a lot of work on that too. I think it's important to address that a lot of times because you're allowed to take care of yourself too. You're allowed to go do things that make you feel better or that bring a smile to your face, right?
You have to. After Sonia first moved in to the memory care facility, and I was alone, a friend invited me over for dinner along with some of our other friends. And she said, but I don't think you should bring Sonia because it might be overwhelming for her. Okay, she was trying to be caring and loving. But my attitude at that point was, well, if Sonia's not going to go, I'm not going to go. We've all hung out and been friends for, decades. And if she's not going to be there, I'm not going to be there. Well, who did that benefit? Did that increase Sonia's quality of life? No. Did it diminish mine? Absolutely. Because I ended up staying home. And I learned my lesson that by denying myself, it doesn't enhance Sonia's quality of life. It only diminishes mine. So now, even though she's at home, I'll still do things, not to excess, but there's a couple of things I participate in every month. And my son will come down and watch his mom while I'm gone for a couple of hours, which is great. There's a caregiver across the street that I hire from time to time as well. But, if you're in a better headspace, let's say, and you're taking care of yourself, you're going to take better care of your loved one. You're going to have a better quality of the relationship between the two of you.
Yeah. You can't fill from an empty cup.
No. I mean, do you get upset if your phone battery's at 20%? No, you just recharge it. It's just the way it is. And our batteries go down. We just have to recharge them.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier, there's a lot of focus on the physical caregiving tasks, but much less on the emotional survival of caregiving. Why do you think that part of the experience is so often overlooked?
My first thought off the top of my head is because it's probably much easier to teach someone how to deal physically, like dressing them, taking them to the bathroom, giving them a shower. That's functional stuff that you can create a video and show people how to do it. The other stuff, the changing your mindset, is much more difficult. It requires some effort, not only on the part of the person learning, but on the part of the person teaching. That's what I think. And look, what did I say earlier about what I found online? I was so surprised. I thought there's got to be tons of good information about my feelings and emotions. And it's all about take a break, find 15 minutes. Great. Okay, then what? And that was part of the impetus for me creating this course, because I felt like I had moved to my heaven island. That's what I call it. I started from here being frustrated and stressed, and now I'm at my heaven island where there's acceptance and there's peace, and I'm a better caregiver for my wife, and I'm taking care of myself.
And that makes you a better person overall, right?
Yeah, I think so. Also, I tell the caregivers, look for the humor. Okay, not to make fun of our loved ones, but they do some funny stuff, and it just creates memories. One time I took Sonia to the International House of Pancakes, and I assume most people know, about IHOP. So as we're getting ready to leave and I'm paying, Sonia just snatches a pancake off of somebody else's plate. He was very nice about it. First of all, I'm grateful that everybody's always been nice when Sonia does stuff, because they get it right away that she's harmless. So he said, that's okay. And of course I apologized. And in my haste to get out of the restaurant, I opened the only alarmed door. So now the sirens are going off. Everybody's staring at me, and Sonia's just contentedly eating her pancake.
Not a worry in the world.
No, not a worry in the world. One time we were at a farmer's market. And she makes a beeline for kids and dogs, little kids. So this toddler had wandered a few feet away from its mother, and Sonia picked him up and offered him to another woman. And she says, well, that's not my kid. And the mother was just really sweet. Sonia gave her a hug, gave her a kiss. But that type of stuff happens, and you got to look, it's a good memory for me. Mm-hmm. Rather than being upset and, oh my God, I'm embarrassed and all that. It's just the way it is. It's just, it's acceptance of that.
Yeah.
One more quickly. We were at a park, and there's a concert going on in the park. All kinds of picnic goers. And we're walking towards the stage, and I look over and I see in Sonia's right hand, she's got a bottle of Pepsi. I didn't buy it for her. She took it off of somebody's thing. And I'm thinking, well, that person's going to look for something to drink later, and they're going to not find it, because Sonia's very fast.
Oh my goodness. And you didn't find out where she got the drink from?
No, I didn't. There were hundreds of people there. I didn't look. No, I just let her have it, I just had to laugh to myself.
Yeah. Laughter is good. It helps you heal along the journey and accept things better, right?
Absolutely.
You turned this personal journey into this course that supports other caregivers. When you were designing this course, I know you talked about how you made it quick, easy, all that kind of stuff. What was the most important to you when you were designing this to make it actually helpful and not overwhelming? Because like you said, it's really hard for caregivers to step away, find time to themselves, like find a quiet corner, and you can take 15 minutes and then what, right? So what was important to you as you were designing this?
Well, what was important to me was I knew I had to make it valuable, but in a short period of time, because caregivers, again, if they find an hour to themselves during the day, they probably don't want to spend it working on themselves, even though it's to their benefit. So I tried to make the course beneficial to the point that it's just small. Like I have modules, they're video modules, and I'm constantly reworking them. They're maybe 10 minutes long with a summary of what was in the module and then some exercises you could do at home to practice what you've learned. But I wanted to make it short and sweet, if you will. People don't have the time, and I understand that. I'm a caregiver as well. I don't have the time. Sonia goes to daycare still now, which is great because I think socialization is important, although she doesn't really engage anymore. But, I have maybe 6 hours during the day to go exercise, to get gas, go to the market, work on my course. It's not a whole lot of time, but it's something.
Yeah. When you talk about clarity, what does that look like for a caregiver who's in the thick of it, like in the middle of the chaos? They haven't quite had the opportunity to just step back and reflect and, work on that perspective shifting, work on that mindfulness. They're in it. They're in the thick of it. They don't see a way out. How can someone begin? Like, how can a caregiver even try to gain clarity on their hardest days when they're in the thick of it?
I guess, again, the first thing is mindfulness, being aware of what you're doing, how you're acting, understanding whether or not your behavior is contributing to the chaos, as you put it. And like the modules in my course have to do with mindfulness, distorted thoughts, limited beliefs, and mindset. Like anything else, you have to spend a little time working on yourself. And I say to caregivers who, I don't have the time, et cetera, and I explain that I've made it very simple and short. But I ask them, okay, let me ask you this. If you don't take my course, where are you going to be in 30 days versus where can you be if you did take my course in that same 30 days? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Either you want to take care of yourself and have a better quality of life with your loved one. I don't say either you want to. I mean, of course, everybody wants to. But either you make that your goal or you don't. But if you don't, nothing's going to change. You're going to be stuck right where you are now, 3 months from now, 30 days from now, which is better. And I'll tell you, I'm such a believer in what I teach people that if they don't see a significant difference in just 2 or 3 weeks, I'll give them their money back because I know it can be done. I know what it's accomplished for other people already.
How is Sonia today?
Sonia, I would say if you look at the 7-stage cycle, and nobody goes just from stage 6 to stage 7 or 4 to 5. Everybody's got a little bit of everything. I would say she's between 6 and 7. It's hard to get her to eat, hard to get her to drink. She doesn't participate, and she sleeps a lot. And I do everything I can. I've given her Boost, if you're familiar with that, because it's high-calorie drink. I give her peanut butter. I mean, I give her those kind of things to put some weight on her. I also give her like liquid IV in her drink so she's not dehydrated. But I realize it's just the progression of the disease. I'll do everything I can, but I don't know how much I can really do that's going to make a difference at this point. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. You start thinking about this stuff. And just in the last few days, I had this thought, and I guess it was meant to be a comforting thought for myself that, maybe the time has come. Her body is giving out, and it's time for her spirit or her soul to move out and re-enter, universal consciousness or whatever it may be. I mean, we all have a lifespan that we're given, and that she's on to the next adventure. I mean, that's how I put it. But it's sad. I mean, I still cry. There's no question about it.
That's important.
Absolutely. Well, look, we think we're supposed to be endlessly patient, always cheerful, and somehow manage everything perfectly. But no one can do that, not even the pros. That's why I say to caregivers, tell yourself, I'm doing my best, and that's more than enough. And let it land. because you are. You are doing your best. When you feel guilty, like you mentioned before, what would you say to a close friend who felt this way? You wouldn't beat them up. You'd give them grace, compassion, reassurance. Offer that same kindness to yourself because you deserve it.
Yeah. And that's really important, right? Even what you mentioned about feeling your feelings. I mean, even as a care provider professionally, I've cried on many of these stories because it is sad. It is sad, right? And it's important to acknowledge that, not lose your compassion, and then be able to turn that into something that's productive and meaningful. And I think that's wonderful. Do you feel that your kids have taken on some of what you preach? Or do you feel like they are going through their own method of acceptance and grief?
The son upstairs, he's the oldest. Sonia has 2 sons and I have 1 daughter. He's the oldest. He's the one that watches her when I'm gone. And yeah, he's understood. I mean, I've seen him go through changes. She's not my mom anymore. She's not my mom. And now he accepts that she is his mom in a different state. Los Angeles, my daughter lives in San Diego, so we don't get together that often. My son's brother lives in Glendale. Maybe it's a 45-minute drive, 30 minutes. It's not that far. He doesn't visit at all. He used to visit her every now and then when she was in the facility. He hasn't been over here once since she's been at home. Never calls me up to see how I'm doing, how she's doing. Never wishes her a happy birthday. Never wishes her a happy Mother's Day. I don't get it. To me, it's just so unloving and so uncaring. And that's just his way of dealing with it, I guess.
Yeah. Grief looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
It's hard. And that's why I ask, sort of how all the kids have handled. How about the granddaughters? I'm sure they're young. How are they approaching it? Are they past the scary grandma phase, or are they still sort of in it?
Definitely. The 2 that live upstairs are the closest because we're close in proximity. And to me, they're wonderful. They're very patient, very loving. One of them, she's 10. She'll hold grandma's hand. And if they design a game, they'll design a game along Sonia's abilities to participate, which
how thoughtful.
At this point doesn't get them very far. One of the granddaughters, I guess about a year ago, gave Sonia a doll to play with. And it was one of her American Girl dolls. And, it's a really loving thing that she did. She got a little bit upset when Sonia removed all the doll's clothes and one of its arms, but she understood. And I explained to her, but you gave it to her to enjoy, and she does. When we're in the car, Sonia will hold the doll, she'll talk to it, she'll stroke its hair, which is really nice.
Yeah. How thoughtful, though, for a 10-year-old.
Oh, yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
Those 2 are 10 and 11. The oldest one is going to be 13. And the youngest is 6.
And how long has Sonia been home now?
She's been home since April of last year. And I'll tell you, boy, she came home on March 31st. And I was always afraid. I don't know what would happen when she comes home and she sees she recognizes. I didn't know. And she's sitting on the sofa and she's eating. And all of a sudden, for the very first time, she had a seizure. It freaked me out. I had never seen that. Her arms went up in the air. She started yelling, and then she slumped over. I thought she was dead. I'll be honest. Bubbles were forming at her mouth. And my first thought is, I got to take care of this. So I called 911. The second thought is, did I do this by bringing her home? Which wasn't the case, but I didn't know at the time. And, the 911 person is, put her on the floor. It's not easy to move. I'm a strong guy. I exercise. I lift weights. It's not easy to move a lifeless body, and I shouldn't say life, you know what I mean, just dead weight. I put her on the floor, and he's telling me how to give her CPR. And we live 2 blocks from the fire station, so they were there very quickly. Okay. Another funny story, if you will. My son had decided, okay, mom's going to come home. We need to baby-proof the house. So he baby-proofed the front door by putting one of those knobs on that just spin around unless you squeeze really hard. So the emergency guys are outside knocking on the door, and I'm having trouble opening the door. I just, hang on, guys, hang on. I finally got it open. And she's had one seizure since then, a few months later, and nothing after that. She takes medication. But man, you got to be prepared for everything.
Yeah. Rick, if listeners walk away with one small practice that they can start today, what would you suggest to begin shifting from burnout to balance?
I think the most important piece of advice is you're doing the best you can, and that's good enough. Don't beat yourself up. And, everybody's journey is different, even people who've gone through it. But just you're doing the best you can, and that's good enough. And the reason you feel guilty sometimes or you're upset with yourself, it's out of love. It's out of love, and that's a good thing. So keep that in mind as well.
You wouldn't feel guilty if you didn't love them, right?
Yeah. So it's a good thing.
If someone is interested in learning more or wants to access your course or you, how can they get in touch?
Well, my Facebook group is facebook.com/groups, or is it group? I don't really, you'll put it in the show notes, /for family caregivers. It's FOR, for family caregivers. So that's one way. The group is free. My course is at forfamilycaregivers.com. And if someone wants to just reach out to me, my email is rick@forfamilycaregivers.com. And I'll be happy to have, conversation with you or whatever you may need.
You've made it easy.
I've tried to, although sometimes I just don't remember all these URLs.
That's okay.
I know.
Facebook group for family caregivers.
Okay, you've got it in front. Yeah. I thought to myself before I got online, I should have it posted in front of me.
That's okay. For anyone who's listening, I will have the correct links in the show notes. And Rick, thank you so much for sharing your journey and talking about what you've developed. I think it's a beautiful course that you've created.
Thank you. I hope it helps people. And I appreciate you letting me have the opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Aging Together podcast. This episode was produced by me, Dr. Pooja A. Patel, in partnership with Natural Eye Media and is supported by our Season 4 sponsor, Safety Grip by Heart Mobility. To learn more about them, check out our Sponsor Spotlight episode. If today's conversation helped you, please follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave a quick rating or review. Your support keeps the podcast free, at light, and growing. Want more? Join our live sessions every other Wednesday and unlock the subscriber-only audio replays through the link in the show notes. Until next time, let's keep learning and aging together. Take care.
Aging, illness, and injury can make the simplest movements feel daunting. That's why Safety Grip was designed with compassion at its core. Its deep, textured surface offers real control, especially for hands weakened by arthritis, neuropathy, or stroke, helping restore not just safety, but dignity. Because when you or someone you love needs support, it should feel like someone's there to help. Visit heartmobility.com to learn more.